Ahsoka is an awfully written fan fiction level attempt at a story, full of cringeworthy, painfully slow dialogue and horrific pacing, with zero character development where storylines are dropped and picked up on a whim, and distracting fan service is jammed into the script without serving the plot, leaving us with just an endless stream of plot contrivances strung together and called a narrative, which is devoid of tension and centered on fringe characters that lack mass appeal. Now, allow me to elaborate. And I'll begin by clarifying 2 points. First off, despite what I just said, Ahsoka is not the worst Star Wars show. But it is the worst written live-action Star Wars show. And if you rewind the tape, everything I kicked off the video with is a problem with the writing, brought to you by the one-man army of Dave Filoni. But more on that guy in a bit. Now, secondly, critically, this show is a failure. But for those who just want to see Star Wars stuff without much context or meaning, Ahsoka is probably fine for them. And there's another subset of viewers who dislike the sequel trilogy so much that they tricked themselves into needing Ahsoka to be good Star Wars, quote unquote, because if Mando Season 3 was a bust and Dave Filoni can't deliver, then these people would be forced to face a bleak reality where there is no new hope on the horizon for Star Wars. For either type of viewer, they just weren't really watching Ahsoka with a critical eye. And if that's what you want in a show, to just get lost in it and not really think about anything too deeply, more power to you. We're happy for you, you do you. But if that's truly how you feel and other people's differing opinions don't affect your enjoyment of something, we have to wonder why you're watching reviews of that something online. Oh well, different topic. Let's get into the nitty-gritty. And if your name is Dave Filoni, buckle in. It's going to be a bumpy ride. First off, we have reviews for each episode if you want to go back and see what we were thinking for each episode individually. Also, remember to like the video if you liked it at the end, and consider subscribing to HateWatchers for reviews of other shows and movies. Now, we're trying to simplify things for our season end review videos to cut down on the length and the subsequent time it takes to get them up. So rather than really breaking everything down category by category, we're going to just cover the good, the bad, and for this video specifically, the Filoni. And of course our rating of the show, what the viewership is telling us, and some closing thoughts. So with that preamble out of the way, let's start off with the good Ahsoka had to offer. We think that the best thing that Ahsoka did was bring these Disney Plus Star Wars shows back to exploring the Force, swinging lightsabers, showing the relationships between masters and apprentices, and just generally doing more of the things typically expected of Star Wars. While something like Andor was better than Ahsoka when speaking of the technical aspects of showmaking and storytelling, the most common complaint about it was how it lacked these typical Star Wars-y elements. So even if it's just at a base level of feeling nostalgic, it's good to revisit the things that make Star Wars Star Wars. Then we also enjoyed the sense of exploration and facing the unknown, with the characters traveling to another galaxy. Say what you will about how it was used, but this kind of exploration in Star Wars just stirs up at least a small sense of wonderment each time. Then there was a bunch of small positives like the ship design and details, Baylan and Shin's design, and the music was on point more often than not. Also, we thought it was cool how the show contrasted Baylan's medieval knight look and fighting style with Ahsoka's samurai-inspired approach, as it harkens back to the two warrior styles that were at the heart of Star Wars since its inception. And Ezra, even though we don't necessarily care for the character from Rebels, did at least liven things up a bit when he jumped in the mix. And we'd be remiss not to mention how the late Ray Stevenson crushed his role as Baylan. Lastly, there are 3 things that can and will also appear in the bad section of this video, those being Baylan, Shin, and Thrawn. Baylan and Shin's initial design and the intrigue they carried for most of the season were both positives. Now I hear the comments already, and yes, with those storylines not going anywhere, then it was all in vain and pointless and stupid, I get it. But technically speaking, their stories aren't fully written yet, so there's a chance that the introduction of these two could still be a positive in the long run, just not this season. And Thrawn. We can't say as much in Thrawn's favor because of how he was handled, but he ends up briefly in the good section because anyone who really knows who Thrawn is beyond his Rebels appearances had at least some kind of feeling when getting to see him in live action for the first time. But it's not all Smurfy admirals and roses because we're moving on to the bad, which unfortunately completely overshadowed the good in the end. Starting at just a surface level, the show looked pretty cheap pretty often. And for a great example of this, look no further than the lightsabers, which have lost their bright white cores and the appearance of a dangerous beam of lethal plasma in favor of duller colors which are designed to make them appear more similar to the lightsabers you can buy at Disneyland, which is disgusting. And Sabine and Ahsoka were doing something similar in trying to make their acting performances indistinguishable from the wax mannequins you find at the Disney parks. Now, I doubt it's the actress's fault and more of a writing-directing issue, but the end result is the same, as we're left with two leads that don't have a personality amongst them. Then, zooming out, you have this big dark cloud hanging over all of these proceedings by wondering, hey, if stopping Thrawn is really that important, why isn't Luke here? And are you really going to sideline him for the lead up to the Heir to the Empire storyline and likely for Heir to the Empire itself? And then there were just smaller but pervasive issues like the continued incompetency of the New Republic that not only makes them look cartoonishly stupid, but also makes any of Thrawn's victories over them feel like wet farts, because he's only fighting a bunch of wet farts to begin with. And lastly, Thrawn himself. While seeing him in live action was good, especially with the entrance they gave him, it was all downhill from there. They didn't do much of anything to make the audience realize why he's such a threat to the galaxy, and they chipped away at what little capabilities we understand him to have every chance they got. Sure, he got away in the end, but not before employing a handful of inconsistent, ineffective, boneheaded strategies to deal with his Jedi rat problem. Being a military mastermind is like Thrawn's one thing, so good job. But of course, these problems are more symptoms of the writing, which brings us to the cowboy hat-wearing elephant in the room, the Filoni. Now, anyone with a critical eye will know that Filoni's storytelling ability is greatly hampered by his propensity for retconning canon to do whatever the fuck he wants to do, and his complete obsession with his original character Ahsoka. Hey, remember when he put a 13-year-old Ahsoka in clothes like these? Not creepy at all, Dave. But while those problems are still present, they weren't even on our radar by the end of the season because of how god-awful Dave Filoni's writing was in his first solo live-action product. And I mean, he hit every single checkbox of bad writing there is. He hit every branch of stupidity as he fell from his treehouse. In no particular order, Ahsoka featured horrendous pacing, endless plot contrivances, shameless fan service, slow hollow dialogue, wild inconsistencies, non-threatening villains, bland heroes, plotlines getting completely dropped for 5 episodes at a time, and storylines that went nowhere, and all of this without a shred of character development. Shows rarely face 2 or 3 of these problems, much less being plagued with all of them. Looking for example at character development, every character is essentially unchanged from start to finish. To begin with, their personalities are extremely shallow, like puddle deep. They're two-dimensional like an animated character. And at the end, no one really has a different approach to what they do or in how they think. The 2 closest things to development we had were Sabine suddenly just getting the Force because she just needs it, and Ahsoka being reborn but now wearing white, which wasn't even an original idea. First off, Sabine. You think that being gifted the Force counts as character development? Please. Next. Ahsoka was reborn, but from what? And into what? Her whole fever dream with Anakin in the world between worlds had no substance to it. At the end, Anakin's message to her was live. Well boy, that changes things. I had no idea Ahsoka was suicidal and had no interest in living anymore. Nothing that Anakin showed her or tried to pass on to her was established in the preceding episodes. It was all pulled out of Filoni's ass when he decided he wanted Hayden in his show. And the show bailed on the one chance it set up for Sabine to develop. She made one difficult choice during this season that, while it did save Ezra, allowed Thrawn to return with an army and marooned Ahsoka and herself in another galaxy. And from this stems no confrontation from anyone on making that choice, and no change in Sabine's character or outlook. Neither character grew, or learned, or changed, or, keyword here, developed. The characters we know at the end of Episode 8 were the same people we met in Episode 1. And that previous list of writing mistakes is by no means exhaustive. Well, it is exhaustive in the sense that it's about the maximum number of words I can get out in one breath. But there were plenty of other dumb, amateur mistakes made. For example, on multiple occasions, the heroes, and boy am I using that term loosely, are kicking back, taking their sweet-ass time in getting there and confronting Thrawn, and trying to catch their one ticket home out of this galaxy. And when the characters are not displaying any stress or concern or urgency, What do you think your audience feels? If the characters don't care about the odds and challenges they face, why the fuck should we? We're saying this for the third time in as many videos, but it's just that important to storytelling. The audience can't connect with a story where they care more about what's going on than the characters themselves. Then there were the hilariously dumb things like Sabine surviving lightsaber impalement, Marrok just being fart gas, Hera's whole storyline about going AWOL being hand-waved away while Filoni tried to force golden member berries down our throat. The list really goes on, but this show doesn't deserve that much more time spent discussing it. And at the end of all of this, we're just left with a weak, flimsy story that could have been an email, where the majority of storylines were not resolved or were even abandoned, and without even a climactic final confrontation with any of the three big bads. All we got was a fight against one of Thrawn's minions who wasn't even made powerful or dangerous until earlier in that same episode. And yet you still have people saying things like, "Who cares if it's called Ahsoka? This is Rebels Season 5. Oh, so you admit that naming this show Ahsoka was just another bait and switch like Mando Season 3. I mean Bo-Katan Season 1. You have to watch Rebels to get it. I did watch Rebels, and in no way does that guarantee that someone will like these characters. You have to wait for Season 2 or the movie. Good storytelling doesn't require pre-reading and further reading to be good storytelling. So all told, two mediocre characters traveled to another galaxy to try and save Aladdin, who didn't have his magic carpet to return, and in the course of doing so got stuck in that other galaxy themselves, while giving a supposed existential threat to the New Republic a way home. Riveting stuff. And the whole way through, it was like Filoni just came up with 150 different scenes that he thought would be cool, and then tried to string them together into a coherent story. But instead we got this. Long story short, based on this outing, Filoni is not the savior of Star Wars. I think he can probably churn out some good stuff if he's restrained by actually talented professionals who take over the writing and correct his mistakes through directing and whatnot. And it's probably best to stick to animation. But if they intend to make him the LucasFilm golden boy going forward, he needs a lot of work, and more importantly, he needs to face criticism of his work, instead of clamming up like everyone else over there. Also, there are no other writers listed for the whole season, so if Filoni wanted all the credit for writing this, he deserves 100% of the criticism. Now, full disclosure, and to no one's surprise at this point, I've always been lukewarm to Filoni at best, and have never hidden that fact. And justifiably so, as someone who's seen all of his Star Wars work. Filoni to me is like someone who was given the keys to the kingdom for Star Wars and a big sandbox to play in. Yes, he's built some nice looking sandcastles, but he's also dropped quite a few turds in that sandbox. And it's like, yeah, that thing over there is nice, but what about all those turds piled up over in that corner? But some people just want to roll around in the sand and not wonder why everyone else thinks it smells like shit. In the end, we're giving Ahsoka a hate watch designation, but it's right on the cusp of being a debate watch. Think of it as us rating this show about a 4, because we're nice people. We gave the show the benefit of the doubt most of the way through, as most episodes were given the debate watch label. But when it was all said and done and there wasn't much of a story and no intent to resolve most of the storylines, especially the best ones the show had going for it, the gloves are off. It's like if you come across little pieces of a cinnamon roll one at a time. You're like, hey, this is pretty good. Let me follow these crumbs to the full thing because that must be good if the crumbs are. But at the end of the trail, there's just nothing there. Or even worse, a Dave Filoni-sized pile of shit with a cowboy hat on it. As for how Ahsoka was received by audiences, well, let's just say that battle lines are being drawn. You'll see relatively high audience ratings most places that doesn't match the discourse about the show or objectively what was on screen. So how does this happen? Well, it's simple. The majority of people still watching and rating the show are the type of fans who will love any Star Wars product no matter the quality. Anakin's in it? That's an 8 out of 10 for me, dog, and you can't change my mind. Dave Filoni sat on George Lucas's lap once? He's the chosen one, didn't watch the episode, but 9 out of 10. And what evidence is there for this phenomenon? The viewership numbers. Ah, those pesky viewership numbers. Relative to just other Disney Plus Star Wars shows, Ahsoka's viewership is hovering right there at the bottom of the barrel. For the first 2 weeks where we have Nielsen data, Ahsoka just barely beat out Andor, which had very low viewership, and Ahsoka was well below all the other Star Wars shows. It even got beat by The Wheel of Time in its second week. Now, The Wheel of Time skews things because it dropped 3 episodes, each of which is longer than Ahsoka. But if Ahsoka is the show that will bring Star Wars back and save Star Wars and each episode is an 8 or 9, then Ahsoka's numbers shouldn't even be in the same ballpark as Wheel of Time. Long story short, viewers didn't turn out for Ahsoka, and in our view, they didn't miss much. Since this show was nowhere near self-contained, you'll have to look for Season 2 or the Filoni movie for resolution, which continues a worrying and annoying trend of Disney Star Wars shows that, like the MCU, must be interconnected and related. And it leads to crap like this, where they're just trying to lead you into more Disney Star Wars shows and movies, and there was never any intention of telling a story that's just good on its own or has any kind of resolution. Unfortunately, for people like us that do want good Star Wars content, Ahsoka is not going to move the needle much in any direction. Like every live-action Disney Star Wars show, this one cleaved off another non-insignificant portion of fans, but it also helped entrench those who can see no wrong in Star Wars in their views. Or those who went into the show with the belief that Filoni must be the savior of Star Wars. So you just end up with one group of people being like, man, this is just not good on a technical level. And another group of people who are like, no, the flashing colors were pretty, and the lightsabers went whoosh. We're not even having the same conversation at this point, so don't expect this show to bring any kind of improvement in the discourse surrounding Star Wars. Comment below, how are you rating this season? Did everything kind of fall apart for you at the end? How far upward will Filoni fail at Lucasfilm? Let us know in the comments. As I mentioned before, please remember to like the video if you liked it, as it does help our videos reach more struggling fans out there. And of course, if you like what we're doing here, or want to hate watch us, then click the subscribe button to stay up to date on our reviews of other shows and movies. And stay tuned to the channel for a video of the funniest clips and scenes from Ahsoka. Thank you for finding sanity in the dreams and madness with us today, and we'll catch you on the next one.